Yes, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to a brand new Rugby Muscle podcast. Yes, we are back with the podcast for 2022. This podcast itself and the next couple podcasts, bear with me with the audio. I've been been really frustrated, having some real annoying issues going on with this audio, but I've made a pledge to get this podcast. And now we're at the end of February recording these podcasts, and I want to be getting one out every single week for 2022 starting from now. So if you bear with me the next couple of weeks, the audio will 100% get significantly better. What won't get better, actually, what will stay a 10 out of 10, will be the quality of the content, the guests, the insights that you're going to get. Like, I'm really putting this podcast has been going strong for a long time now, and you guys listening, I'm really proud of the loyal fan base that we've kind of established here. Listen to the Rugby Muscle podcast. So if you're part of that fan base and you haven't given us 5 stars, well, now you've even gotten a much better opportunity, because Spotify is actually now allowing 5-star reviews. So please go to Spotify and give us a 5-star review. It really does help out. If you listen, obviously, on Apple Podcast, give us a 5-star review there. On Spotify, you don't even have to type well, you don't have to on Apple Podcasts as well, but on Spotify, you don't even have to, you can't type any words as a review. You just go there, give us 5 stars, and that will help out massively. For this episode, we are joined back. We're going back to the old tried and tested. We've got my man Alex Miller from Kabuki Strength on, formerly of CrossFit London. So we had a real big chat, because something that we both get questions as coaches is on CrossFit. Like, I get asked all the time about CrossFit and rugby, the carryover, how it can work, how it can help, what can be improved with both aspects of rugby and CrossFit in terms of like training and how that can be done better. So we discuss all of that and more in this hour-ish long of CrossFit and Rugby Dissected. Hope you enjoy it. I'm joined by Alex. Alex is in Canada, and I'd have to turn my camera a hell of a long way to get there. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, man. Good.
I actually have got one of my athletes lives in Canada, and he's doing some large slow lifts, and he's like, "Oh, what do I do about runny noses when it's this cold? Run inside." Like, no, definitely don't do it. That's not a solution. And in fact,
he's lifting, right?
Yes, but he's also need to develop the aerobic system. You know this.
He's going to the gym.
Yeah, of course.
What's in the gym with cardio machines?
That's what I'm saying. Go inside, but that's not. Don't do it. That's different.
Oh, so don't do it outside, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and speaking of doing conditioning inside, today, because we're joined by you in a different country, the last time I was joined by you on the podcast, you were in a CrossFit gym and you were part of a CrossFit facility. Now that you've left that, I want you to dig the dirt up. Like, tell Alex Miller says what he really thinks on CrossFit today on the Rugby Muscle podcast. What do you think? Should we discuss?
Yeah, we talk about CrossFit.
Cool. So it's definitely the modality that I get asked about the most, is whether it's Metcons, whether it's just CrossFit in general. Rugby players seem to align themselves with CrossFit a lot. And I know last year we did a really good podcast dissecting what powerlifters can learn from rugby players and rugby players can learn from powerlifters. I think we want to do something similar to that, but with CrossFit. I think in order to understand, like, or frame this conversation from that point of view, we have to straight away, like, say that CrossFit is its own sport. Right, we're looking at CrossFit as a sport, kind of a training modality, but more than anything, it's a sport in itself. What can we learn from this sport, and what can this sport do better if you're going to train this way, right, as a rugby player? But realize that they're two very, 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 rugby and CrossFit are two different sports, two different things, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying, hey, I'm going to go, play water polo instead of like rugby to train.
And that doesn't mean... Go on.
I'll say it's definitely, there's a place for non-rugby based conditioning in the rugby program, I think. Like, in the off season, potentially want to do something which isn't, but it's not going to replace your rugby training. I think as a GPE kind of style deal, like something different, maybe it's a place for it there.
Yeah, I think...
Yeah, it's not going to replace it.
Yeah, it's a different sport. It's not even a complementary thing. Like,
no.
In general, right? There can be complementary things that it can help you build towards as a rugby player, but in general, what you've got to understand is that they're different sports, and whilst one can help the other, it's like, yeah, water polo maybe, I'd look at more like, yeah, rugby players do judo to help them, or wrestling to help them with techniques within the game. With CrossFit, rather than techniques of specific parts of the game, we're probably looking at different physical qualities that we would develop
Yeah.
through the lens of CrossFit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I just picked up what players around sport.
I know.
I wasn't thinking about rugby. Yeah, I think even then, CrossFit, physical quality developer, like, I'm not even sure it's like good then.
Yes. Okay. So before we get into that, are you still in touch with the CrossFit world? Where is a CrossFit game soon, or is there an open coming up?
Yeah, so the Open is
I think we're in it.
Sunday. Yeah, it's around now.
Okay.
It's usually near the end of February.
And what I know it's constantly varied, blah 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 blah, right? But what is the actual open? Because that's when we're looking at the CrossFit Open, that's as CrossFit as a sport as it gets, right?
Yeah, so I would say the CrossFit Open is a low barrier entry first round competition. So what they use the CrossFit Open as a competition to induce like a community feeling, but also to filter out high level athletes to go into their actual.
And what will the Open is, isn't it like how many seconds? It's a few weeks. So the CrossFit Open is what, consecutive weeks of
Oh, it's
specific workout. Yeah. Yeah, but it's
Yeah, so it's
a specific workout, right? 4 weeks, a specific
yeah, 4
workout. So
weeks.
it's, you can do it whenever you want, but ideally it's like preparing for a game, right? You do your week to prepare for that workout. If you
Yeah,
do, or if you're a casual, just like you're a casual rugby player, you just rock up on the day, you give it your best effort, and you see how you get on, right?
well, try not to get hurt. I think. So, yeah,
That works for both ways as well. And
right.
so
The injury level spikes.
And so, what do those sessions look like? They're usually in intense 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, so the time domains for CrossFit are kind of weird. They're quite varied. They go from like 3 minutes up to like, dude, they have like a marathon row.
Yes, that was about as extreme as it got, though, right? I do
Yeah,
distinctly remember doing a marathon, or not doing. I did do a marathon row. Okay, let's be clear.
yeah,
Don't want to mislead anyone. I do distinctly remember them doing the marathon row and watching that, but that was a good few years ago. But and that's more of the exception.
yeah. So we're normally like 3 minutes to say 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, and so that's the sport that if you're a CrossFit athlete, that's what you're going to be preparing for, right?
Yeah,
And so with that, like we can almost analyze and see there, like that's quite similar. And maybe if you do like a regional competition or whatever, because there's a lot more of these as well, right? It's not just the games, it's not just CrossFit regionals. There's like, I don't know,
there's
I'm gonna
many.
make the Thames Titan throwdown. You know, like there's lots of different mini competitions and
Yeah,
whatever. If people want to do that, more power to them. It looks, I was gonna say it looks like fun. Does it look like fun?
this sounds like hard work.
I mean, the people doing it, they don't look like they're having fun. They look like they had fun afterwards, and maybe that's the same as rugby, right? But that's the point I was going to go to. Is it's intense, and then there's a break, and then it's intense, and then there's a break. Like even with that, that's very similar to what we are dealing with fitness demands wise to a game of rugby, right?
Yeah, so I I think the training probably looks more like that in terms of time demands. The events tend to be static and like say for a 3 minute event, like it's a 3 minute flat out. That you don't get a
Right.
break on that one. And then for one of the longer events, there'll be a pacing deal. So it'll be more uh like a jog, 20 minutes. I'm not saying that's the event, but that's kind of the way you're looking at
Right.
it. Whereas the time demands of rugby are intermittent sprint time.
Yeah. But then even I'd say
Yeah.
with the longer CrossFit events, you'll have like, 5 cleans into a run to 5 or they wouldn't do 5
Oh
pull-ups.
yeah,
They would do
yeah,
20 pull-ups and the pull-ups would be akin to running fast. Yeah, because they have, pull-ups isn't a high demand in activity as for CrossFitters, especially the way they've got that technique down.
yeah. That kipping pull up, that's a butterfly.
Yeah.
You have to talk, man. Yeah, that's a skill. Sure.
Yeah. But once they've got that skill down, pull-ups end up being actually more of an aerobic activity compared to, most people that can do pull-ups, like that are doing it for pull-up's sake, are more like, that's more like doing 10 reps or something, and that's actually very tough.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Um, Yeah, so I can see there's a similar time.
Yeah. Yeah, similar time demand, kind of similar sort of energy system demand, but as you say, like rugby is a lot more intermittent sprints. And I say, yeah, you're almost certainly right in that there's a lot more down period. Maybe if we compare CrossFit to like rugby training, it's a lot similar as well, though, because you can mimic later on in the game intensity in training. And I think that that's something that sort of shows the intensity of rugby when it's at its most intense. And you don't always get exposed to that. More often than not, it's not, right? More often than not, you're standing still and walking for the most part. But when there are intense moments in rugby or intense times in rugby, you've got to be prepared for those. So you've got to train those. And even so, yeah, you expect those to happen. Just like it fixed on my. You want to touch on what you said there as far as CrossFit as a modality to build CrossFit performance.
It's not constant testing. So we could look at CrossFit and a lot of high intensity stuff, like TJ alluded to. If you could raise your aerobic capacity, then you raise your reserve, which is kind of what you need in CrossFit as well. So I personally would see the sport of CrossFit as a less than optimal way of developing the sport of CrossFit. But I would
Yeah.
look at something like a lower level training for CrossFit. So doing something at a lower intensity and building up capacity alongside a decent strength program as a better way of building up CrossFit kind of fitness in the same way as like you might be doing your tempo work plus sprints plus strength for rugby. You'd probably break down the course of CrossFit kind of like that. So you'd
Yeah.
have like a gymnastics element, you'd have a weightlifting element, you'd have a low aerobic element. Then you bridge into competitive style. So when I write out, so I've got a regional CrossFit athlete on my cards at the moment. And for him, we break down his programming into preparation phase. Then we have a bridging phase where we start introducing the competitive stuff, that kind of harder, yeah, harder end stuff, and then into a competition phase.
Mm-hmm.
And we would presumably be very similar for rugby, and maybe a bit more current for rugby, I'd imagine.
Because well, it depends on how long your rugby season is, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I got a pro basketball player at the moment, and he gets like 4 weeks off season a year. It's
Yeah,
insane.
that's yes.
It's fucking
You
insane.
have no choice but to do concurrent stuff if that's your case. But in
Yeah,
general, um, this is a side tangent. But if you had, I don't know, let's say if you had 2 years of no necessary end goal, right? Like the end goal was for the CrossFit Games in 2 years, and then I'll ask it for rugby. If you had the end goal was to perform your best in either the CrossFit Games or some competition in 2 years' time, how much of that 2 years would you spend in the prep phase versus the bridge phase versus the
okay.
uh
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd cycle it. So I'd probably hit competition phases every year or each year, but it would be less psychologically demanding. So there would be no repercussions for not getting it right.
mhm,
Right. But I would still touch on it. And like, even though I'm saying, hey, I have these like limiter stages where we build up on whatever the limiting factor is, there would still be occurrences of high intensity work. We can't like sacrifice all the higher intensity capacity just to build lower intensity capacity.
I
It's
do
just
I
basically
do want to
touch.
touch on that there actually. Preparatory phase often gets a bad rap because just people think it's just boring, like easy stuff. You can be in a prep phase and do real heavy work at even heavy, fairly specific work when the time calls for it. You don't have to be limited by that. Sorry, carry on.
No, I totally agree with that. Like even in powerlifting, like if I have someone in a preparatory phase, like they still squat bench and deadlift.
Yeah,
Like there's still heavy occurrences to that. You have to stay in touch with your sport skill. And like
yeah,
this is the difference between how we do a 2 year plan for rugby and how a 2 year plan for something like CrossFit. Is like in 2 year plan for rugby, you probably still play rugby,
yeah.
right? You wouldn't just not play.
Well, yeah, you would try to. I mean, and again, actually, that's a sneaky little way of doing things. But what I've tended to do and what I've seen with some of my athletes that I'm dealing with at the minute, like these last 2 years with like COVID sort of ravaging the fixtures list and stuff.
Yeah.
Like some of the times we're using games as like, just go out and have like you can enjoy this game because there's no pressure of performance win or like try some new things and we can go into that game fatigued and be okay with that, because it's not the be all and end all. We're almost using the training as an extra stimulus for the program. So we're not, so yes, we're actually playing a full game of rugby, but we're still in our prep phase. And I think that that's a way people can solve that sort of problem of not having enough time in the off season for rugby. It's like really trying to target specific games or target specific times of the season when you really want to be prepared, and then be okay with not being perfect all the time, especially, with how things are at the minute. Particularly, I'm seeing in the UK a lot of decline in rugby anyway, as far as regular weekly fixtures go. Not necessarily as far as, this is something I want to explore, is the barrier to entry, that is the barrier to entry of rugby getting higher and therefore driving participation down, or is it just in general people have got more options as to what to do with their lives on a Saturday? But that's, Jesus, we could go on. This could just be the Tangents podcast if we wanted it to be, mate. But I want to get your answer then. Okay, so you've said once a year would be your.
No, it wouldn't necessarily be once a year, but it'd be at least once a year.
It'd be at least once a year. If we had to give it percentage of time to
20%.
20% of the time would be the specific phase.
Yeah, I think so.
It's almost impossible to. I'm just trying to get some real.
There's some numbers on it.
Yeah, just so that people can sort of understand and wrap their head around it. If you're looking at CrossFit region, that's fucking impressive, right? They're doing. They're at the top of, look at their lifting numbers. You look at all of their numbers across the board are great, right? Their Fran time, their whatever time is going to be you'd look at that and you'd be like, this person is the fucking nuts. They are spending the majority of their time still working on developing their general qualities.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people don't think that when they think CrossFit. They think when they're thinking CrossFit, they think, okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do a WOD, I'm going to do the Fran. To get the best Fran time, you wouldn't just keep doing Fran. You would get stronger. You would then, for Fran, you wouldn't, if it was just Fran, you wouldn't need any aerobicness, but you that would come along just because it would be part of your training, and this is a stupid straw man scenario, but you still get the point, right? Even if it was just to be better at that particular WOD, you would still not just do that particular WOD, you would do other things. And so within CrossFit, we look at Metcons and we think, okay, that's it. We're going to do CrossFit, and that's going to help us become a better rugby player, right?
Yeah. You can't just expect to. You can't surpass your limits just by hitting your limits all the time.
Yeah. And so speaking of which, we'll go back to that 2-year scenario, and you got to answer it for a rugby player.
Yeah, for rugby, I would have a more concurrent style. So
you're not allowed to.
I'm not allowed to.
No. You have to do it. You're not allowed to, right? No, you're not fucked.
So you could have it so you did that.
It's so difficult though, right? Because you would still have those 3 phases, but you would do them concurrently. You'd spend most of that time, as I yap on about, right, is developing that high ceiling. You get your speed work in, you get your strength work in, you get as high as you can, with all of your outputs that you need for rugby. You become a beast with your high intensity actions, and then you really widen your base, so you get the best aerobic system. You get the best, even with talking about hypertrophy, you grow big muscles to support more intense actions, to support more strength growth. That's a terrible way of phrasing it, but to support more strength gain because of your extra muscle, which will support more power, which will trickle down to everything else. You develop overall movement patterns that are better, and that really widens your base out. Now you've got a really wide base, you've got a really high ceiling, you've got so much room then to work in the middle. Now the thing is with rugby is you do that work in the middle on a Tuesday and a Thursday night if you're just a local player. You do that work on a Saturday if you're in season. You do that work or if you're just doing your touch rugby, or if you're doing whatever, that's when you do that work. You don't really need to do that work to develop that middle room. You're developing this wide base, you're developing this tall ceiling. That middle is going to come by default, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, That what you've just described as concurrent training.
Yeah, I know. And it works for, and then, you know, it's almost like we're building out, yeah, we've got the wide base, a real solid foundation, and we've got a big high ceiling. We build the building first before we go inside and we start doing all the decorations. But if you're a CrossFit athlete, those decorations have to start, you actually do have to spend time working on those because they are important. And I mean, if you're doing double unders, that's a difficult skill. If you're doing butterfly pull-ups, like that's standard, right? That's not even just, if you don't do butterfly pull-ups really well, you're not doing anything at
Yeah,
CrossFit Regional.
yeah,
Yeah. But you're not even close, right? With rugby, it becomes more of a skill thing. I mean, the skills are there, but they're almost seen as a completely different entity. You're seen as working on your passing, you're seen as working on your tackling, etc. With CrossFit, because those skills are sort of gym based,
yeah, the fundamental. Yeah.
the waters get muddied a little bit, right? Because it gets a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I mean, you could do like weightlifting where you have like skill sessions. I know you have max sessions, but it should be the same, right?
And then even then, it's difficult because the skill of snatching with
Yeah,
40% is
heavyweight.
completely different to the skill needed to snatch with
Max
100%.
70, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's nuts. It's in powerlifting as well, but yeah, I mean that's the skill of programming, right? To
Yeah,
figure out where it works.
yeah. I definitely think that's, if we can think of things that CrossFit can do better for CrossFit's sake, it's the same approach that we would say to rugby players, right? It's develop those qualities first. Don't just, I mean, just do as minimal amount of metcons as you need to. In fact, that's a general nice little rule of thumb because,
Yeah,
like, and I've got the caveat as you need to. It like puts that caveat in there of like, if you're 1 week out, well now 1 week out's too close, but if you're 6 weeks out from the CrossFit Games, you might need to do some fucking metcons. That's fine. Like that's the place. If you're on a Thursday and you've got no plan as to what to do, but you're playing a game on Saturday, you don't need to do it. Is there anything else that you think as a sport CrossFit can do better that
I think
people
we need to actually differentiate between why people do CrossFit as well. Like some people just go in and they just want to kill themselves. Maybe that's like that's their jam. And for those people, like if they don't get that high intensity stimulus, they're like, nah, I'm just gonna go to another gym.
but
Right.
yeah,
So we kind of gotta kind of separate those people out. So on that note, like educate people better.
that's what I was going to say, because that those people that want to do that, like, yes, I understand it, but even then, like killing that, there are so many different ways that you can do that. And if you're talking about like zoning out and just taking care of business, right? Like there are so many different ways that you can do that aren't CrossFit, that are probably, or sorry, aren't CrossFit, that aren't Metcons. A lot of time, like when we say the word CrossFit and Metcon sort of get interchangeable, right? Metcons aren't necessarily the one. Like if you can zone out and do 40 minutes of real quality zone 2 work, and if you really want it to struggle, like, do it in, I don't know, do it inside and with your eyes closed.
Yeah, cool.
I don't know, man. Like, I think in general, like, set some goals and try and achieve those goals. And you don't have to do the thinking as to what you need to do. You just have to do the execution, aka get a coach, right? Like that's it genuinely, like, I know this is what we do, so we're like, obviously we're going to say this, but we believe in it so much. It's so true that, like, if you're a lot of those people that want to just go to a gym and zone out and kill themselves, it's because they don't know any better, and it's because they don't want to think about it. But
Yeah.
if you think about it enough to think about why you want to do it, like okay, I want to go kill myself. Why? Because I know that exercise is important. Why? And you eventually get to a point where you can have a goal that the answer is not do a Metcon 5 days a week.
I just so dull as well.
What do you mean?
Well, if I had to go into a gym and just like beast myself for an hour, like every single day, well, I just wouldn't want to be there. I'd be so bored.
Yeah, I think that's why you get quite a high dropout rate with these things. But that's where CrossFit sort of the dodgy thing with CrossFit is like you do get a high dropout rate, but those that stay go through such a process that's what gets CrossFit the cult reputation, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a confirmation bias there, right? Or survivorship bias as well.
Yeah, but yeah, both of those things is definitely true. Like, whereas but you're starting to see it more and more and more, and not just because Greg Glassman showed himself out to be a bit of a piece of shit. It's also because other gyms are following that model, and they don't want to pay Glassman or CrossFit's lawyers thousands of dollars a year. They want to just get all the benefits from it, and they can do that. And that's why group training is being still growing in popularity, year on year on year, because it ticks that. But you can program this in a much smarter way. The difficulty there is, as we've said, you could get one person in a gym for a certain reason. You could get 9 other people in that exact same small group, and they go for 10 different reasons. So therefore, their solutions to those 10 different problems are 10 different solutions. But you can still mimic that. I mean, if you do it well, you can still mimic. You can still get a group environment and do 10 different programs. And I think that's something that you built out in your CrossFit gym when you were there, right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the time people just socialize as well, so there's no time to actually talk. Like, you're not even getting those kind of pleasure points.
Yeah, that's a big thing, right? I think it is weird. I was talking about this before, and we're at the gym. Like, you show up, and these are your friends, but you don't have the time to talk to them because you're not giving yourself the rest. That's what makes a huge benefit to like proper strength training, where you do get that rest between reps. You get a little chat, you take care of business, you have fun. Sorry, you take care of business, you do your heavy set, get it done, you work your ass off for that, 5 to 20 seconds. You stop, and then you just have fun with your mates.
Yeah, take a 15-minute break.
You don't have to take a 15-minute break, mate. But it's the same thing that I think should happen in most rugby settings. You have a bit of a laugh, you go get a drink of water, or you have a bit of a laugh when you're lining up to do the 4 corners of justice drill, or whatever your drill you're doing. And then when it comes time to take an action, you do your action. You do it intensely, you get out.
I think that comes pretty naturally with rugby, though, right?
Yeah, it definitely does.
I think that happens anyway.
Okay, so what you said, I think your answer was just better education, but it's difficult to educate people if the actual... Did you hear double me then? It's difficult to educate people when the actual system that you're educating them in is fundamentally flawed.
I'll just be a better coach.
But but so you would go against, you'd be like the pastor at the front of the church telling people that Jesus wasn't really the Son of God.
I mean, yeah, if it's not true, you can't preach it, right?
Yeah, but then you're not a pastor.
But you're freaking out saying pastor.
I really thought you were going to say, yeah, I'll be a pizza. But yes, 100%. I know what you're saying. I get your point, right? So in general, CrossFit should take the good things that it's doing, but slightly bias the training less. But then what happens is people enjoy those workouts, right? They feel like they finish those workouts. They feel like they've accomplished something. Yeah, like you say, they get that survivorship bias, the confirmation bias. They feel like they've done that. Is there a way that they can sprinkle those in then? If we're looking at this concurrent model?
Yeah. I mean, just because we're saying we're in a proper phase doesn't mean there's no high intensity work. Like you said, like in rugby training, it's just these people. You still have to do like high intensity work. It's just maybe that isn't the primary focus, or maybe the volume's slightly lower. Like, you don't need a ton of exposure to high intensity work to maintain quality. So like, don't be so confined to this rigid idea that preparatory work has to be low and slow. Like, you're preparing for a task, which means at some point you've got to cover all the base.
Yeah, and in general, like if we're looking at those numbers of yours, was it 30% is
25%, something like that,
and then 10 to 20 is the bridge. the rest of that is, that's how you could also look at any given microcycle or any given mesocycle, is like, that's how you'd want to probably divide up your time in general. If you're doing concurrent, like you could do one or two high intensity sessions, and along with 4 or so. When we say lower intensity, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just on the elliptical fucking scratching your ass reading a book, or it doesn't mean you're on the leg extension machine just knocking out reps after reps after reps whilst texting someone. Like, that's not what we mean. Like, you can do real quality work and build real quality improvement and adaptation without the fatigue. And that's why we're doing it, right? Is that you can build that base out so much wider to allow you then, when it comes to doing that high intensity work, whether that's a WOD, whether that's a real intense metcon, whether that's a rugby game, like when that game is there, or when that challenge is there, you're much more prepared for it. And if it's a training stimulus, you're going to get more training stimulus out of it as a result of that.
I think that's fair. I don't disagree with that.
Any other problems that you see with people generally wanting to do CrossFit as a modality to become a better rugby player now? We'll look at things.
I mean, yeah, there's like overuse stuff going on there. Like rugby typically shoulder unfriendly sometimes. CrossFit's particularly shoulder unfriendly sometimes. This total loading there's a bit, it's quite high. I don't think there's a really good way of doing both at the same time, because like CrossFit, like you're going to be pressing a ton. There's a ton of pressing in CrossFit, and most people don't have the control of the shoulder joint.
Even like the butterfly pull-up has an element of pressing in there, right? So, and maybe it's because you can't measure like the angle, but you never see rows, apart from obviously the concept too, but you never see like barbell or dumbbell rows, particularly in the competitions, right? So I'm just going off by low. Yeah. So, but you get so much pressing. So that's obviously going to, that is definitely going to build an imbalance issue. I think that lower body, fairly equal amount, except potentially there's not enough single leg stuff.
I think I disagree with that. I think there's a lot of single leg stuff, but I think it's all very quad dominant. There's not a ton of hinging.
Yeah, because even like especially if you do, if you're doing bounce off the floor deadlifts, you can catch it and sort of quad it up as well, as opposed to definitely you're right. And you don't, there's no RDL, because again, you're not, there's no there's no way to measure if you're doing an RDL versus a deadlift, so you can't, that gets scrapped.
Yeah, and even like there's not often deadlifts, but there's clean. But clean is just pretty quad dominant anyway. With every single clean you do, every Olympic lift you do, comes a squat as well. So we see people generally do have like great quad development, but really shitty hamstring development, which leads to its own issues, especially if the demand and then sprinting afterwards. If you're undertrained hamstrings, then sprinting is an issue.
Definitely.
So yeah, there's that. I think there's not a lot of like frontal plane movement, it's very sagittal, and there's not a ton of rotation movement either.
I was going to say transverse. There's none of there's everything is
sagittal,
and that's a lot of general. I think that would, if we're looking at rugby players, that's a general weight room mistake that I see a lot, and it's easily fixed. It's not. We're not saying for every sorry, when we're talking planal movements, we're talking about like, for the most part, when you're in the gym, right, you're resisting gravity, you're moving things up. I mean, or pulling them down, but you're still resisting gravity by pulling something down to put a weight up. In like that's I'd say 99.9% of weight room activity, right? Even when you're running, you're up and down, you're going up against gravity. But we can also move laterally. We can move side to side. You do so in a game of rugby. You also rotate. More often than not in a game of rugby, you're doing all three. Now, obviously, as we've already alluded to, when you're in the weight room or when you're in the gym or when you're doing physical work to get better at rugby, you're trying to build muscle, you're trying to build strength. Kind of awkward to do that in the doing lateral work, doing rotation work to do that. However, like when we're looking at power, when we're looking at stability, stuff like that, we want to make sure that we're getting some, do 90% of our work just up and down, lifting weights, just clanging and banging and getting some quality work done. But we want to make sure that our gains completely transfer, and we want to make sure that we have less injury risk when we go onto the pitch, and we're just that much more prepared. So a little bit of rotational work, a little bit of lateral work can go such a long way. And for you as a human, not just a rugby player, so that when we're looking at CrossFit and we're criticizing how CrossFit makes you the fittest athlete in the world, then we're looking at Like maybe they should introduce more of that, right?
Yeah, and I think they are trending towards some more demands that way. You see a bit more odd object work,
Oh,
especially
and they do the burpees over the bar is about as it does that hits all three planes.
I mean, I guess they had a good one a few years ago where they had they started at the top of a tennis stadium and had to carry sandbags down to the court, take a cross, climb over the wall, transfer.
Was that the one where the one girl had to quit because she was dying? She like literally nearly died because it was also really hot.
Oh yeah, it was pretty sunny that day. I think they had that trail run as well.
Actually, yeah. If we're looking at things that we want to say CrossFit should be doing better, this is something that I think attracts rugby players in the first place, which is not a good thing. And probably, I don't know, it's celebrate again. It goes into that confirmation bias. It's this idea that of like pushing yourself to the limit all the time and celebrating the hashtag grind. This sort of culture that they breed of. Well, Pukey the Clown is a perfect example, right? You put yourself.
That was. I mean, I think they've got rid of that now, but the whole idea was fucking insane.
And what they've got Pukey and Rabdo, yeah.
This,
like, this you can like. Firstly, like you shouldn't celebrate that, right? Like that's not like you haven't really accomplished anything. You've just pushed yourself really hard, but that's not like what's the task? Like if you puked and someone else coasted in a minute before you, like, you know what I mean? That person that coasted in is much more prepared. They should be celebrated. That's the task. The task is it's always in like a game of rugby. The task isn't to work hard. The task is to win, or the task is whatever it is. You know, it's why
because he's just completing the task. He's not working fucking hard, is he? It's the win.
Yeah, 100%. And so, like, I mean, if you look at all of the people that I love using Matt Fraser as an example because he was so dominant. Froning too, to an extent. I'm not sure about the new mullet guy. I'm just not clued up on him. But he's in the league, and they just look so calm, right? And it's not because maybe they are pushing themselves, but they're just develop themselves on that much of a high level that everything looks easy. That's what you should be celebrating, not pushing yourself so hard that you look like a cat screeching every time you deadlift, or you're pushing with a sled with the most ugliest form in the world, or whatever CrossFit meme you want to find, right? That's not like you're not developing anything there, and you're not achieving anything there. Like it's already that would be something that I definitely think CrossFit needs. Well, rugby players from a lens of CrossFit should be really wary of, because it's also the same thing in rugby, right? Like the amount of times that we would do back in the day, like. If you've got an old school shitty coach, you do coat hangers. So you'd start at the halfway line, you go through the one post, you go to the other, and they would never tell you how many that you've got to do, so you couldn't pace yourself, and you would do them for no reason just because you lost the game. And that's time when if we're talking about utilizing your time efficiently and not burning yourself up, that's like if you've got 90 minutes on a Tuesday, 90 minutes on a Thursday, like you want to be spending that time being as technical as you fucking can and developing all of that stuff. Whereas doing coat hangers is just a waste.
Waste of time. Like, exercise as punishment is fucking stupid.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, in general, this could be a whole other podcast, but I'm just not a fan anymore of using rugby time as fitness time, because if you're doing fitness, like it's going to come anyway. Making it slightly more intense gives you maybe a slight extra lactic fitness benefit, but it gives you none of the skill benefit or technical benefit or tactical benefit that you would have done having practiced rugby, and it gives you a shit ton more fatigue, which means that the next few days it becomes that much harder to make extra improvements, and it just doesn't make sense, and we need to get away from it.
Yep, totally agree. Most learning under fatigue, really difficult.
Is that another thing that lead on yourself onto another thing that we can improve with CrossFit?
Yeah, I guess that didn't really occur to me before, but I mean, just covered it. Honestly, learning new skills when you're tired is almost impossible. Right?
Yeah.
When we look at our motor learning hierarchy, we want to go from like low fatigue, low load, low speed, all the way to like high fatigue, high load, high speed. But to get there, there's like 7 or 8 steps you got to fulfill first.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't be doing skill work being bugged.
That would be something actually that I would say in general, CrossFit does better than rugby though. So hear me out. So like in CrossFit, if you go to your first start, a lot of gyms will, you can't just show up and go, oh, I'll do CrossFit. And they go, okay, here's your WOD. Like, no, you'll have to go to like a 4-week on-ramp to understand the methodologies and pray to the altar of whoever's in charge now, because it's not classmen. So anyways, you do you learn the fundamental movement. So if you don't know how to power clean, I think they teach you like a whatever it is regression, right? And you do those things, and I mean, they can do it so much better, obviously, hence all of the memes. But you learn a degree of technicality before you do any WODs, for most of this stuff. Now, whether you then should at any point just transition into doing 4 WODs a week is a completely different, or 4 Metcons a week is a different conversation. But they do a good job of teaching you the basic skills before putting you in a high intensity. Rugby, and then even like as part of the warm up, they do a good amount of skill work, I think.
Yeah.
And then eventually at the end you'll do your Metcon. In rugby, I think too often those skills that you've learned once are sort of taken for granted, and we go far too often straight into small-sided games, or we go straight into small-sided games, or full games, or team runs and set piece work, and then that's it. And you don't get the time to really technically work on your left-handed pass, or your chasing tackle, or your carrying ability, from a pass on the left. Like, I think this is something that people need to understand, is you should constantly be working at your skills as a rugby player. And it's difficult because there are so many fucking skills, but that means you need to put more time into them at a low level, before training, like, because you can't take the responsibility if your coach can't just take the full responsibility to do all of your skills. Like line up lifting, just practice just lifting and getting that coordination down. Then when it comes to working on your set piece, you've got that skill down and it becomes that much easier. Rugby doesn't do a very good job of differentiating when it's skill practice, when it's technical practice, versus when it's like game time practice. Probably ruck is probably even the biggest one, right? You get to a ruck and you're taught, maybe you're taught, if you're new or you're a kid, you're taught a couple of times. Then it just goes, okay, you're going to hit this fucking bag as hard as you can, or you're going to hit, and what we're doing, are we working the technicality of how to ruck? In which case, this is way too high intensity to do that. And what else are we working on if that's not what we're working on?
Yeah, man, I totally agree. That's one of the biggest issues I had at rugby, is I didn't have any basic skills, because I didn't start from grade 18. Like no one fucking tells you what to do.
Yeah, 100%. That's why you're a winger.
Yeah, got a prop.
I mean, that's it though. Like 100%. That makes so much sense. Is there anything else that you think the rugby players, or is there anything else that CrossFit does well that rugby players can also learn from, or rugby as a sport can learn from? Because it's a new sport. There must be.
I mean, yeah, like the intensity when it's required, I think they do quite well as well. Like I know it's kind of the same. It's like the opposite of the coin. Like when it's time for intensity, they're pretty good at bringing it.
Yeah, and encouraging each other to do it as well.
Yeah. Yes, I think as much as we're like bagging on the intensity like elements, like there's a time and a place for it.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I think often, like, it's also both parties could be guilty of this, but I do think rugby is guilty of it, is that like you're almost expected to be intense for all of Tuesday, all of Thursday, the whole game on the whole game on Saturday, like including run into the coach at halftime, including run into the scrum to get ready for that. Like,
oh yeah,
you know what I mean? You're expected to perform at such a high intensity that it's just not possible. And in fact, like all the best players, like you could see you see it so often. The players that look like they're getting everywhere is not because they're the fittest player. Like Tom Curry sometimes looks like there's 2 of him, and that's not just because he's got a twin brother. Actually, it's just because he's got a twin brother. Oh well, I was going to make it. No, when he's playing for England, right? Like he's so effective at the breakdowns, but that's not because he goes to every breakdown and tries as hard as he can, and eventually he comes out good. It's because he chooses when to get involved at the right time. And I think if you can learn that skill, probably by just being fitter in general, right? By being aerobically more sound, you can analyze everything much better. You know when that intensity needs to come. And it's the same thing, I guess, with CrossFit, right? If you know what's expected of you for a given session or for a given Metcon, you know when you really need to push, and maybe when you know you need to go unbroken for X amount of sets versus when you can take it steady.
Yeah, dude, pacing's huge. Like people don't know about pacing. It's the same thing, right? It was right. It's not hitting every rock. It's just pacing your like rock
100%.
components.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. Pacing's a big deal.
Okay. So in general, like I think, do you like CrossFit?
I like it as a sport. I think it's quite interesting as far as like barbell sports go. Like it's probably up there with the more interesting ones. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't, I don't like it as a training modality, but I like it as a like a.
Well, but you're when you're saying as a training modality, you're saying that as Metcons being the training modality.
But yeah, traditional CrossFit, I guess, is what I'm talking about. Where you just go and beat yourself. Kind of don't worry about anything else. Basically, all the bad things that we've said today. That's true.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? It's like what I do really appreciate about it is the idea that you're trying to be prepared in all things. You're trying to be really be a complete athlete across the board. Across the board, it was the same thing that makes me think rugby's the fucking coolest sport in the world because you've got to do so many, not just different things, but opposing things like that. That not you're not just having to be someone that can prop and scrummage against someone, and then you also have to run. Like those are two complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So not only does one like not only do those goals not align, they almost detract away from each other. Yet you've still got to
Oh,
do that on a regular basis for rugby, and same thing for CrossFit. And just the issue is, right? How do you go about solving that? It's not by doing everything at once. And that's the problem that rugby players run into. It's the problem that CrossFit athletes run into if they're not well educated. It's not, and because of the demands are so vast, like you need to have a plan. And the longer that plan or the longer term you set that plan, the more room you have to really develop like the qualities that you need. And the higher eventually your ceiling is going to be, right? But I do think it's cool. And then as a sport, what they've tried to do really well is like really define what fitness is. The problem is that it's definitely not, well,
yeah,
not necessarily what fitness is, but they've really tried to, get objective measures out there. The problem is that, I don't know where all of these Olympic lifts came from because I think if anything, they're just a big barrier to entry to stop someone that's random, some random villager that lives in Papua New Guinea that just happens to be really fit, really jacked, really strong and everything. Like they have to go to CrossFit for 2 years to learn all of these skills,
yeah.
So
Well, that's what High Rocks is trying to do, right? High Rocks is trying to make a low barrier entry kind of deal with that.
yeah, yeah, a lot less. But even then, there's like, if you're a small, the reality is, right? They're trying to accomplish the impossible because
Yeah,
you cannot have a uniform objective of what fitness is because the body is capable of doing so much. Which then shows why rugby is such a great sport, right? Because there is not just one way to win the game. Like if you want to beat your opponent, you can fucking run straight over them, or you can run around them, or you can tactically prepare your team better. And there's all of these different ways. Within a team, you can have all these different players and there's different tactics. So, like, eventually you've just got to figure out what getting fitter means to you. And it's going to mean something on, as a rugby player, probably as a human, it's probably going to mean developing both ends of those spectrums, getting them bigger, getting them higher, getting them wider, spending as little time in the middle as you need to, but when it's needed to, know that you need to go there and know what's required of you. Boom.
sweet.
Mate, anything else that you want to talk to about CrossFit?
No, I think that's a pretty good point to end.
Mate, I think I want you to tell everyone that you hate CrossFit, that you hated your 2 years that you spent there, right? Because you hope to go in there and just turn it into a powerlifting gym and you're unsuccessful.
I mean, I made powerlifting the most popular option. So,
All right, mate. Cool. You've changed your handle recently, so I want to make sure that if people want to follow you and follow your ramblings about data when it comes to training, they know where to
I,
follow you.
so I did a presentation for USA Powerlifting last week. It was about data analysis and collecting metrics. I literally made a graph about how often I make graphs for Instagram. Yeah.
Mate, infographics and mate, they are unironically very popular. People love to make infographics on the infographics, particularly when we're talking about like how infographics are really important for social media and that stuff.
Yeah, handy.
Okay,
Anyway, yeah. So coach_Alex_.
I'll put it in the links below, mate.
Sweet,
Good man. That was a really good episode. I enjoyed chatting.
sweet. Me too.
All right. Hey there, it's TJ once again. Thank you for listening to that episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm just here one more time. I know you thought you were rid of me. I've got something pretty cool that I want to send your way. I've tried to condense all the most important things that you need to make progress: the training, the mindset, the nutrition, everything you hear in these podcasts and more, presented in a free 2-week program called Rugby Muscle Kickoff. Through Kickoff, you'll have access to 2 weeks of emails delivered directly to your inbox, 2 weeks of videos, education, and interaction, and access to tools, strategies, tactics previously reserved only for paying clients. To join, simply click the link in the description of this podcast, the one that says Kickoff, or if you want to go old school and type it out, then crack on. Access it at rugby-muscle.com/kickoff, all one word. Cheers for listening to the podcast. See you guys next time.